The first half of 2023 closed with a very eventful month defined by crossover shows and huge multi-man tags. A new weekly TV show was premiered on the AEW side of things, and a few matches and other promotions would shape the rest of the year to come. Personally, I didn't stray too far from my usual rotation of promotions, as life can happen and interfere with your hobbies, but there was still plenty to discuss for this series, documenting my favorite matches and moments through the course of a calendar year. If this is your first time finding my videos, here are some terms and conditions as to how I go about doing this. First, it's obvious I will not have seen every single match take place. Time and money are finite things, and I have some major blind spots compared to other channels, blogs, or podcasts. The great part is, if there's something I haven't seen that you'd have, I'd love to hear your recommendations so I can add them to a separate watch list and continue the discussion. Second, favorite and best are different things, and my favorite matches may differ from, say, something critically acclaimed by Wrestling Observer newsletter. This is not a top 10s video or a hidden gems type thing either. My selection of matches is simply based on my own personal enjoyment, rather than star ratings, cage match ratings, or any sort of business metric. And last but not least, a spoiler warning for match finishes. By the numbers, I watched 204 matches spanning 8 promotions. Here are a few of my favorites from June of 2023. With the sheer volume of high-profile multi-man tags this month, this one has been lost in the shuffle due to it taking place only 4 days in. It hasn't gone under the radar entirely, as it's gotten its fair share of praise. While I don't think this is an all-timer by any means, it's a whole lot of fun and worth taking another look at. The setup for this match intertwines nicely with Okada's year-long feud with up-and-coming talent. He's been dismissive toward Shota Umino for months now, with the Roughneck relying on an old friend and his faction in order to issue a never six-man title challenge. Moxley has history with both Ishii and Tanahashi, and Shooter immediately wants a piece of Okada. The wild card here is Claudio, having never crossed paths with any of the opposition here. Starting the match against Tanahashi was surreal to see, and given that Claudio can base for just about anyone, he makes the most of his time in the ring with the ace. The first half of the match takes its time to introduce all these dynamics, and these all-star tags have more emphasis on the individual encounters rather than a cut-and-dry story. They do, however, do a good job to keep those isolated feuds in the back of your head, like Ishii never hesitating to resume his war with Moxley, or Okada and Umino taking petty shots at each other before their dedicated segment later in the match. The second half of the match expands on the present feuds, both in the ring and on the outside. There's a lot of moving parts, but it's never difficult to follow. By handling the match this way, you get the dedicated segments within the respective feuds, and also some interesting rotations to allow Claudio to have these first-time interactions. It's absolutely insane to be at a point where Claudio swinging Kazuchika Okada in Osaka-jo Hall was never out of the realm of possibility. Moxley and Ishii have an abbreviated slugfest, and I personally think New Japan's presentation lends itself better to this than most of the Dynamite singles match they'd have later in the month. The finishing stretch with Okada and Umino brings things full circle, and the exchange is much more competitive than you might think, though ultimately the youngster eats another Rainmaker in defeat. It wraps up things nicely to keep this Okada story going, as well as providing a seamless transition to the challenge from Bryan Danielson, but we'll get to that. I'd like to preface this by just saying that I'm not taking part in any discourse regarding backstage drama involving CM Punk and the Elite. There's hundreds of videos that do that already, and quite frankly, I don't care about any of it. What I will say is that if we keep getting six-man tags like the Elite versus Blackpool Combat Club, as well as the main event of the debut episode of Collision, then there's plenty of great wrestling to enjoy from both schools of thought. AEW is at its best when it provides variety, and this match reinforces what a second live show can offer. The Dynamite main event prior to this gave us a non-stop modern fireworks show, though this delivered something a little bit more timeless, a comfort food match, if you will. With all the discussion being around CM Punk, I think there's much more credit that is due to the heels here. Well, at least in Chicago they're heels, but the combination of Bullet Club Gold and Samoa Joe did feel thrown together at the time, but when you think about it, it makes for a very balanced trio. Jay and Juice's over-the-top heel work combined with Joe's monstrous presence were perfect for their heat segments, and their cutoffs were executed incredibly well, meshing together with FTR's fantastic hot tags. They didn't really take too long to get to the Punk Joe stuff either. I was only 8 years old when their legendary trilogy took place, so this was a special moment, and it's great to appreciate it as it happens. I think we got a substantial amount within the match, especially like the headlock spot callback, but they didn't spoil too much leading into a potential singles match next month. The dynamic between the two, while not active in the match, actually complements the action of the legal men, as everybody in the building anticipates Punk's first tag, and nobody in the match wants to be caught in front of Samoa Joe. The finishing sequence with the heels keeping CMFTR restrained in submission holds was great drama, capping off a match that lets everything breathe but is never boring. This serves as not only a great first main event, but a very strong preview tag for the feuds in weeks to come. While it's still early days, Saturday nights are indeed alright for a fight. This is a match described by some as a greatest hits collection from these two teams. I can't personally attest to this as I'm a newer fan to both modern All Japan and Big Japan to begin with, but I can at least offer the perspective of why someone without prior knowledge can enjoy this match. If you aren't familiar with these teams, the Violent Giant pairing of Shuji Ishikawa and Suwama, as well as Big Japan mainstays Yuji Okabayashi and Daisuke Sekimoto, are very large dudes with a reputation of hitting incredibly hard. They had a pair of highly acclaimed tag matches in 2019. The significance of this meeting being that it could very well be the last time they all share a ring, with Yuji Okabayashi's looming departure from pro wrestling. It's a poignant slugfest, and with everybody in their 40s by this point, a sobering reminder that time waits for no one. Still, there was really no chance that this wouldn't kick ass. It kicks all kinds of it. Despite the familiarity, there's still a feeling out process to start off. I really think this acts as more of a way for everybody to soak in the occasion. Shortly after, Shuji Ishikawa lands a double stomp off of the apron, and the bombs begin to fly. I've said it before, but in matches like this there's really no point in me reciting every single strike or drop, as we'd be here all day. Much of the match is dedicated to a final showdown between Okabayashi and Ishikawa, whose paths go years beyond this tag feud. For a last rodeo, it's fantastic. Sekimoto and Suwama get involved when required while still letting their partners take center stage. Everybody gets their moments to shine, especially in moments of huge combination offense. Without talking in circles about the brutality on display, I will say that you get all of the hard-hitting wrestling you could ask for, with a ton of heart behind it. Okabayashi wins with a huge splash from the top before both teams share an emotional moment together. Dudes rock. Go Shiozaki is my favorite Noah wrestler, and he's not had a singles match in 10 months. His return from injury was instrumental in the Kongo Exodus storyline over the last couple of months, reforming axes with Kazuchika Nakajima. Despite this renewed bond, Go hasn't had much success, taking the fall when they lose, but never scoring the victory when they win. He'd find himself in the main event of the June 22nd Korakuen Hall show against Kenoh, the leader of Kongo, looking to extract some revenge on Shiozaki. Kenoh has been on quite the run in 2023, appearing in 40 matches and showing up in practically any promotion he can. Shiozaki enters Korakuen Hall donning his ring attire from his stellar 2020 championship run. A run which included a title defense against Kenoh that ended in a 60-minute draw. Shiozaki is very detail-oriented, so this can be interpreted in many ways. Personally, I read this as someone down on his luck, looking to recapture some of the magic from those days. He does find it just a little bit too late. Naturally, the action is based around Kenoh's kicking versus Shiozaki's chopping, and your mileage may vary because of that. It's a very good Korakuen Hall main event on the surface, elevated by the story of Shiozaki being forced to dig deep and find that next level that's eluded him since his comeback. As the match goes on, Shiozaki slowly starts to turn it on, with some sickening limb work on Kenoh's knee. The more vivid examples of this is a lariat to the leg while on the ring apron, and running Kenoh into the barricade like a battering ram. Shiozaki incorporating this strategy into the strike exchanges by chopping Kenoh's leg is a minor thing that really goes a long way for me. It's one of the reasons that makes him so great in my opinion. There's hundreds of incredibly hard-hitting matches like this that wouldn't put that kind of thought into it. The two beat lumps into each other in what essentially becomes a test of endurance. This is ultimately where Kenoh has the advantage. His 2023 has been non-stop, and he has the engine and mental fortitude to go the distance. He escapes an extended cloverleaf sequence, giving him an opening to hit a crucial kick to Shiozaki's head, allowing him to go for the PFS and the victory. It might be a bit of a reach to suggest Kenoh could take this much targeted offense, but I think the point here was for Shiozaki to look strong in defeat, and in turn making Kenoh look like Noah's MVP heading into the N1 victory tournament. These were the type of matches that I've really missed from Noah in 2023. It was really refreshing to have them back. In a weekend filled with bad faith, where's the story arguments, STARDOM delivered a match entirely driven by the story of Queen's Quest, more specifically their leader Utami Hayashishita. On the surface, you might question how a 12-person elimination steel cage match could accomplish this. I was skeptical myself, though it starts and ends with Utami's performance. The months leading up to STARDOM and Sunshine event were filled with turmoil amongst Queen's Quest. Utami's credibility as a leader had been scrutinized by her faction, and the growing friction between her and Saya Kamitani had fans expecting some sort of turn. Queen's Quest were locked in the steel against an Oedo tie that prides itself in its reputation in unit warfare, the stipulation here being that the last remaining in the cage would be booted from their team. I tend to do more linear discussion in my videos, but in the case of this match, it's probably better if I do it in pros and cons. First, I really enjoyed the pacing and execution of the important moments in the match. For how crowded this thing can be, you rarely have any awkward collisions, and the individual encounters all feel right from a story perspective. The camera work does a great job keeping up with all the individual moving parts, and I don't think anything overstates its welcome, even if I have problems with the in-ring work at times. The booking here is where the match truly shines. Utami literally puts the team on her back at times, prioritizing the escape of her teammates, really getting across a sense of urgency, and that she is completely willing to lose it all for the sake of the group. On the contrary, Momo Watanabe escapes relatively early, and Natsuko leaves Saki Kashima out to dry. It's a vital crack in the foundation for a group that rarely comes up short in these unit-on-unit scenarios. They bank on the false contingency that Saya Kamitani would betray her leader, but it never happens. While everything unfolds, I found myself waiting for something bad to happen, but we got the most satisfying conclusion possible. Saya makes the save for Utami using Watanabe's baseball bat to not only secure the victory but the future of Queen's Quest. The shot of a bloodied Utami embracing Saya atop the cage is one of the more powerful images in all of wrestling this year. Many STARDOM fans consider this to be an all-time classic, though I actually disagree. It's an all-time moment, but not necessarily an all-time wrestling match. At times it is very messy, but that is kind of by design, especially early on with a lot of obvious waiting around and some outright contrived spots. There's also quite a bit of no-selling dives off the cage, and with some of them coming at incredibly crucial points of the match, it could be a little bit jarring. It's what you sign up for, but it's still very noticeable. The positives outweigh the negatives for me, but if you told me that you outright didn't like this match whatsoever, I'd understand where you're coming from. But despite those issues, during a weekend where scrutiny was placed upon a lack of storytelling in wrestling, this was one of the most satisfying conclusions to a story all year, and a defining moment for the Red Queen. I expected to cover something from Forbidden Door coming into this video, though not quite like this. This wasn't my favorite match on the night. That would go to the absolute blast of a 10-man tag. This match, however, became the most interesting match to discuss in hindsight. By the time it actually got in the ring, it had a lot of things going against it. For starters, you got your opening bell over 4 hours into the night, and after a consensus favorite Ospreay Omega match already jumped the shark. In addition, the expectations of this match were astronomical to begin with, and we now know that Bryan Danielson snapped his forearm with about 10 minutes to go. My first impression was that it was a very good match, but something just didn't feel right. I didn't pick up on the injury initially. I just assumed Danielson was selling because it's Bryan Danielson and he's really good at that. So after a few days, knowing the entire story, I really wanted to dive back in and see how I felt about it in a vacuum. And it turns out I liked it a whole lot more. With a lot of talk about the crowd being burnt out, I watched this back with headphones on. Granted, the perception of crowd could also fall in the audio mix, so keep that in mind too. I think they were still up for it when it came to their own participation and chanting. Where I find the fatigue more obvious is that they weren't reactive to a lot of the work between the bigger moments. Again, this is all occurring at the end of a very long show, and after Ospreay and Omega attempted murder. I don't blame them. I've been to a few of these AEW pay-per-views myself, and they can be a really long night. Why it stands out here, though, is because Okada and Danielson thrive in both the bombastic moments as well as in the weeds, and a lot of the minutia went down amongst a pretty subdued audience. By no means did it ruin the match for me though. Most of my problems with Okada main events weren't present here. It didn't feel slow or plotting, and the limb work early on clearly played directly into the finish. At least in my interpretation, this felt more like a Danielson match, but that also could be because following your big Tokyo Dome pacing will not always translate to a North American audience. So whoever was calling this, I think, kept that in mind. The feigned seizure spot was a bit odd, but with the gift of hindsight, it's clear that this was a way to communicate to everyone that Danielson was hurt and that things needed to be changed. These two made the most of it, and the shift Danielson put in was nothing short of spectacular. The visceral imagery of him forcing the lapel lock in spite of his arm was incredible. I think this match will be looked on more fondly for its significance as an actual dream match and Danielson's insane improvisation to get to the finish line. At the end of it, I'm just happy that they had a match to begin with, though my hopes are high that they will run it back in the future free of any injury. Getting the final countdown for Danielson was also a huge bonus, and similarly to how I feel about the Punk Joe stuff earlier, it's so special to be able to experience those things in real time as an adult. And before I go, here are some honorable mentions that weren't brought up in previous entries. Lee Moriarty vs. Katsuyori Shibata from the June 2nd Rampage. The wrestler faces one of AEW's better up-and-comers that fits perfectly within the pure rules. More Taiga style on TV, please. Zack Sabre Jr. vs. Jeff Cobb from New Japan Dominion on June 4th. A follow-up sprint to their 15-minute draw from May with a very clever finish. You can find this one for free right here on YouTube. The main event from the All Together Again event from June 9th between Noah, All Japan, and New Japan, which is much more about the encounters than the action itself, though it is surreal to see someone like Kento Miyahara share a ring with the likes of Tanahashi and Okada for the first time. This also adds another chapter to the Okada and Kaito Kiyomiya generational battle, and a ton of fun for any fan of the major Japanese promotions. Kento Miyahara and Yuma Aoyagi vs. Kenoh and Manabu Soya from All Japan June 15th. Kenoh's interpromotional tag run comes to a close with a very good tag match that sets up Yuma for a big month in July. Hideki Okatani and Harashima vs. Kazusada Higuchi and Yuya Karuku from DDT June 16th. These Harashima tag matches on these tour dates continue to be my favorite part of the promotion this year, and this one is contested with no ring mat since it didn't arrive to the venue yet. Gunther's singles matches on Monday Night Raw with Kevin Owens and Sami Zayn respectively. Another month where WWE didn't prioritize things from a bell-to-bell perspective, which isn't surprising, but putting Gunther with these two is a no-brainer, and if given a little bit more time, could have been something truly great. Athena vs. Kiera Hogan from Ring of Honor, June 22nd. A wild, plunder-filled brawl featuring a ridiculous bump in the finish, further proving that Athena is one of the best champions going right now. And last but not least, Claudio Castagnoli vs. Commander from Rampage, June 30th. Castagnoli once again showcased his ability to be a fantastic base for what is easily the best Commander match since he signed with AEW. And that's it from me. If you got this far in the video, thank you so much for your time and for hearing what I have to say. Please do all the obligatory YouTube stuff, and find me on Twitter at OuterStevon, that is if the app actually works. Let me know what your favorite match from June was in the comments below, and I'll talk to you again sooner than later with a bonus episode.